Hello, everyone. This is Carolyn Young here on behalf of the Organic Council of Ontario, and welcome to, I think it's our fifth webinar in a series of webinars called Your Standards, Your Say. Just want to make sure everybody can hear me. Wave your hand, Joel and Rob, you can all hear me? Yes? Okay, good. So today's webinar will be from 12 to 1:30, and I want to just say thank you to, we've had some sponsors of individual webinars, but we also have sponsors of the series of webinars, which has been really helpful. Thanks to Cambrian Solutions and Freeman Herbs, who have helped with offering sponsorship to make these webinars happen. So before we get started, I just want to make sure everybody understands that your audio is probably currently off. We made it so that you would be muted upon joining the webinar. And we're going to keep all of the participants' videos turned off for now. If you have a question that you want to ask the panelists throughout the webinar, feel free to send it to our chat. There's a little chat bubble in your functions, and we will try and make sure that that question is brought up, or we'll respond to you during the webinar. But everybody will be able to ask questions, whether through chat or even in your own voice at the end of the webinar. Around 1 o'clock, we'll start with question and answer period. I also want to make sure everybody is aware that this call is being recorded, and we will be sharing the recording with everybody who registered for the webinar, as well as it will be available to people a bit later, more publicly. So if you are having trouble participating in the webinar for any reason, if you can't hear or can't see, please do contact Zoom support. We can't help everybody during the webinar. There's only 2 of us on this side of things. So, and with that, we'll get started. So, really excited about this panel. We have a number of OCO board members, which has been really nice, but also some really interesting, diverse opinions. So as I said, my name is Carolyn Young. I'm the Executive Director of the Organic Council of Ontario. We don't have Simon Jacques with us, but he is our OFC, or the Organic Federation of Canada representative, and the representative on the technical committee. And he sometimes joins us and sometimes doesn't, to help with the welcoming and to do an overview of the standards review process. So the purpose of these webinars, this webinar series, is really to get more engagement on some of the hot button issues that are up for discussion for the next review process. And as many of you know, the organic standards must be reviewed every 5 years, and the next version of the standards needs to be published for 2020. So that's what we're working towards. We also have with us Hugh Martin, who is a former OCO board member and also the chair of the technical committee. That's the committee that does a lot of the voting on the standards. He has a longer term background on what discussions have been discussed in the past, the history of parallel production in Canada, and what we're trying to do with that now. I believe he's also involved in the roundtable, cropland roundtable on this. Sorry, working group, I should say. We also have Mike McGillivray, whose name I've misspelled here. I apologize for that. It's McGillivray. There's a lot of L's in there. He's with us from Kirkview Farms, and he's going to discuss the specific issues with parallel production and transition. We also have Alison Squires. Again, I misspelled her name, Squires, from Uplands Organics. She's a latecomer to the panel, but really important perspective from Saskatchewan, and maybe would like to continue to prohibit parallel production, so bringing that perspective to the panel. Joel Aitken here from EcoCert, and he's going to discuss some of the issues with parallel production and certification. Andrew St. Jean from Beechwood Agri-Services, and kind of discussing things from a buyer's perspective. And then Rob Walbridge here from Thompson's Limited. He's the chair of the Organic Council of Ontario, and also a member of the crop working group, and on the Standards Interpretation Committee. So lots of really great perspectives with us today. So just a quick overview of why we're discussing this. As I mentioned, according to the Canadian General Standards Board, the organic standards, which is a guideline or a set of principles and guidelines for how organic production should take place must be reviewed and updated every 5 years, or they become archived. And that those standards are referred to, they're not the same as, but they're referred to by the Safe Food for Canadians regulations, formerly the Organic Products Regulations. So those regulations inform how the standards are enforced and regulated, and refer to the standards as a guideline, but they are not the same documents, and which has some implications for how industry is involved and how government is involved. So overall, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency has jurisdiction over the enforcement of those regulations, and they have delegated a lot of their authority to conformity verification bodies who oversee certifying bodies who then inspect operators. So there's a lot of different moving pieces, but basically CFIA is at the oversight element of those regulations. But CFIA is not involved in the actual interpretation, although they do, I should say that the Standards Interpretation Committee is supported and funded by CFIA, I believe, or is it the CGSB? Yes, CFIA. And the Standards Interpretation Committee is there to clarify issues of the current standards. So when there's a question about how to interpret the standards, the Standards Interpretation Committee is provides clarity on that. And then, as I mentioned, there is Canadian General Standards Board Committee on Organic Agriculture, the technical committee, which votes on each draft of the standard, and our representative, as I mentioned, is Simon Jacques, but there are also a number of other associations involved in that process. And then the Organic Federation of Canada is very, very much involved. They have a representative from each province on their board, and their job is really to shepherd the process of reviewing the standards, and they create working groups who specialize in particular areas. So the process started back in July when people were invited to put in proposals for how the standards should change, and those proposals have now been sent to different working groups to review and to provide insight on the questions and suggested changes. So I won't go into too much more, just to say that the standards do adhere to International Standards Organization guidelines, which is part of how we decide whether those standards have to be, what the process is around changing those standards. We have to adhere to those guidelines. And they are slightly different from US standards, the National Organic Program, in that the National Organic Program is actually embedded in regulation, whereas here the Canadian regulation refers to the standards. And this gives industry a little bit more leeway in terms of how what changes come about. And as I mentioned, they have to be updated. And one of the key things to know is that the CGSB is now a revenue neutral agency of the government, and requires that industry standards, when they're updated or changes are made, that there be a payment for that process. So that's one of the contentious issues in the industry right now, is that we don't have any funding for the maintenance of our standards, and other jurisdictions and our major trading partners do. So if you would like to see and learn more about that, I suggest you get in touch with the Organic Federation of Canada or Canada Organic Trade Association, who are lobbying on those issues. So without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Hugh Martin to discuss sort of the history behind the idea of parallel production and the pros and cons from his perspective. Hugh, are you with us?
Yes, I am here. And unfortunately, most of you can't see me because my camera is being a little wonky today and doesn't want to seem to work. But with that, I guess this whole issue of parallel production has always been kind of a controversial one. And Carolyn, if you want to just go to the first slide there. Basically, this is what the standards actually say right now. If you've got standards in front of you, it's sections 513, 514, 515, and it talks about how the farm has to have a complete transition of the production, and where we get into issues is quite often that the farm, as it is transitioning, you'll start with conventional, and then you'll have some transition, and eventually you'll have some organic. So you get these split operations that have got a little bit of each going on. And then how do you keep those separate? In 514, it says that you basically can't have parallel production except under these situations of perennial crops that are already planted, agricultural research facilities, seed production, and vegetative propagation and transplant. So there are some allowances now, and those allowances were not there in the original standards if you go back to 2006. But we have gradually added to those, and you can see 515, there are some conditions in there that go into it as well. But go to the next slide there. Basically, we started with prohibiting parallel production back, I think, when the 99 standard, which was voluntary standard, was put into place. And Carolyn, can you advance the next slide? We went with that for a number of reasons, but the main one was try to reduce fraud, try to reduce problems with operators intentionally or accidentally dumping a load of grain in the wrong bin or wrong truck or whatever you want to call it. And we wanted to encourage a complete transition of the farm. We didn't want to have farms that were split forever. We wanted them to get all the way into organic. The other thing we had was that it was prohibited in the EU, and at that time we were shipping a number of crops, wheat and spelt, to Europe, soybeans, Japan, and they were actually probably at that time larger trading partners than what the US was when you go back 20 years ago. So we were trying to catch a middle ground for Canada between Europe and the US. It was always allowed in the US, but those were some of the reasons that we kind of went to it. And fraud prevention was probably the number one. It has never changed, or the reason we have it now, the prohibition on parallel, is just that it's always been that way. Go to the next one there. And numerous times as we went through these revisions over the years, there have been people who have said, well, we should permit parallel because it's a barrier to transition. It's a barrier to certain types of CB monitoring activities. And processing allows, if you got a cookie factory, you could have one line with organic and one line with conventional, as long as you got the records to show how they're separate. And of course, USA allows it. We're going to hear more about that from the other speakers as we go through the program. So there's always been this back and forth. 5 years ago, when we tried to review the standards, parallel production was very much a contentious issue. We had a blog back then, and I think there's something like 70 comments on it. The working group and the technical committee, when they looked at it, were really split. And in order for the technical committee to make a decision, we need to have a consensus. It can't be a 50-50 split as it was last time, more or less. You have to have a consensus going one way or the other. And we just did not have a consensus to make a change. So it's put forth again, and we're reviewing it again. Carolyn, step up next there. So this year we had at least one, I think there's several proposals to allow parallel production in the Canadian Organic Standards. Working group discussed it, rejected making a change. They presented that rejection to the technical committee in October. But the technical committee, again, we had, I think there was 4 people on the committee who didn't agree with that. There was a couple who did agree with it. So basically it was sent back to the working group for more discussion on the pros and cons and a scan of where the other trading partners, the other countries around the world are. and it'll come back to the technical committee again, likely in March. And the issue is we're going to have to find a consensus in both the working group and the technical committee in order to be able to make a change. So that's kind of where we are right now. On to it. I think that was my last slide, Carolyn, is it? And so anyhow, from there, I'll leave it to other speakers, and whenever, Carolyn, we're doing the questions, why, feel free.
Thanks, Hugh. So up next is Mike McGillivray. Mike doesn't have the slides with him, but he's going to speak from a perspective of a producer and from the perspective of transitioning. Mike, do you want to go ahead? Make sure you're unmuted. There you go.
Yeah, sorry, I apologize. I had to unmute. And Carolyn, there's no problem about getting my name wrong. It's like happens 99.9% of the time. So, good afternoon, everyone. So Hugh, his actual last slide is actually a great one to carry on from. We made the decision 2 years ago, basically, to start transitioning into organic. And we have 196 acres, about 130 of it's tillable. And we made the decision that we were going to transition all of our land over. But the challenge is of course, transitioning that much land to organic all at once is very difficult to do. So we utilized natural features of our property, as well as some man-made that allowed us to basically keep the 8 meters requirement for a buffer zone between organic and non-organic. And we were leasing out the land at that point in time. So the leased land was still being farmed conventionally, but we had natural buffer zones that allowed us to transition on the other aspects. So for us, it was the decision to go all organic was more a value, more about in line with our values. And we didn't want to have to explain to customers why certain fields would be organic and certain weren't. But understand that that's a cost issue for a lot of folks. That it is significant. There is significant cost to transition. And currently in Ontario, as most of you are aware, there's not a lot of support from a transitional point of view, unlike some of our neighboring provinces. So hopefully that will change in the future. But right now, it is very difficult. So, and the biggest thing is the issue of parallel production. It is prohibitive in some aspects. I understand why certain entities or certain folks are looking to try to have this aspect included, because it does make it difficult for conventional producers to transition into organic. And at the end of the day, if we can come to some sort of consensus, and maybe some of these, and I encourage people to involved and contribute to the working groups, as well as getting their opinions to the technical committee on this, so that everyone does have a say. Because at the end of the day, we do want to transition more of our land into organic, and we need to have methods of doing that. And I'm not for or against the parallel production. I can actually sit on both sides of the fence, as long as it's an 8 meter fence, and argue both ways, because it is a challenge, but a lot of it comes down to specifics with respect to each farm. Each farm is an individual farm, and the people running that farm, they have to have the commitment. So that's some of the things that we had to address when we were looking at doing this. So it is a challenge, but it can be done. People are doing it now. That is the thing. Parallel production is being done. It was done in our case through a separate entity farming the other portion of the land. And other people are setting up separate entities, and it makes it difficult for the certifying bodies in that case then to audit, because they do not have access to that entity. So there's definitely arguments on both sides of this issue. So But from our point of view, long term, we think that we definitely need to have more organic production. So if we were to had to make a decision, we would want to see more folks go into the transition strictly into organic. So.
Mike, can you just explain in brief to people why it makes transition more difficult? Like maybe a bit about how your fields would look if you were allowed parallel production versus if you're not, and
So
as a transition.
So we're in a kind of unique situation because a lot of our fields have a natural, either natural or man-made buffer zones. If you're not doing, if you were having a farm that didn't have those natural buffer zones, it is a significant portion of land that you would have to block off. So if in a field, you would have to have an 8-meter buffer strip that you would have to take out of, basically out of production in order to have that buffer zone between the organic and non-organic. So that does have a cost. And, any land that you don't have that's being productive is a challenge. Now, in our specific instance, we only had 2 buffer zones that we actually had to create because they were going against our neighboring farms that are conventional. And even if they weren't conventional, I think you would have to have a long-term agreement in place with the other farm that they were going to farm organic as well if you wanted to try to reduce that 8-meter production.
So what you're saying is that parallel production would allow for people to use those buffer strips towards the conventional
yes.
stream, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there is, again, each farm is unique. Each circumstance is unique. So making blanket statements that, that this, and, the idea of fraud, well, it can happen either way, whether this is in place or not. If someone's intent is to defraud, they'll find a way to do it. So, using that as, as the stop against everything and saying that we can't do this because of this. If you're an ethical producer, you're gonna abide by the standards. So.
Okay. Well, on that note, I'd love to hear what Allison has to say. Allison, are you still there? Did we lose Allison? We lost Allison. Okay. Well, let's move along the chain, and then hopefully when Allison, oh, she's the co-host now. Oh, okay, she's still there.
Hi.
Hi. For some reason we lost your video.
No, I apologize. There I am.
There you go.
When Mike started talking, for some reason Zoom just stopped working. So I apologize if I look crazy, but yeah, I'm here.
Okay, so you are able to share your screen if you wish.
Okay, awesome. So let's just figure out how to do that. Is that working?
Yes.
You can see I can't see. Oh.
Yes, we can see it, and you need to click to move things along.
Okay. Anyways, okay. So I want to thank for allowing me to be here. I know it was short notice, but I appreciate it very much. It's a really interesting topic out west as well. So a little bit about me. I'm a fully organic small grains farmer. I farm with my husband, and we have 3 little ones, and we run about 2,000 acres of small grains. So we also incorporate grazing. We do a lot of soil health work, and we're actually working to getting our farm closer to no-till. So that's kind of our passion right now. So that's kind of from my perspective. So versus Ontario, the prairies, of course, has a different growing system out here. We're more typically dry land areas. So, but we do have almost 80% of the field crop acres across the country are in the prairie provinces. And Saskatchewan, actually, in particular, has the 2nd highest number of certified organic producers in Canada. So although our perspective is different, it's still, I think, a valid one to consider. So when I prepared for this webinar, I actually wanted to get the opinions of several other prairie producers to kind of get a holistic view of what the issues are out here. And so I talked to both certified organic producers and transitioning organic producers out on the prairies, and I have to say not one of them said that parallel production should be allowed in the standard. So that's the perspective that I'm coming from, trying to represent that point of view. Okay, so you see my slides, perfect. So I want to go through some of the benefits that I think the parallel production, that not allowing parallel production has, and then I want to get into some of the issues that have been brought up, that reasons why parallel production should be allowed, so I can kind of give my perspective on both sides. So the first thing is consumer trust. Our industry as a whole, the organic industry, has been built on the trust of consumer. Just recently, a report came out, 66% of Canadian consumers buy an organic product on a weekly basis. That's a huge number of people. 48% of Canadian consumers see the Canadian organic logo in particularly as very trustworthy. So we don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize this trust that consumers put into us. There are groups out there who seek to erode this trust and will capitalize on the possibility of fraud happening with the topping up of organic product with conventional, even though we all can think that nothing will happen and that 100% of the time producers won't accidentally or intentionally mix product up. There's still that possibility there, and that's what those groups are going to seek to use to erode trust in consumer and organic products. The second thing I think we need to consider is that not allowing parallel production provides strength to standards in a very significant way. Very few countries fully allow parallel production. And as you mentioned, it is actually prohibited in the EU. And I know most of us prairie producers ship our product overseas. We do direct shipping actually through large containers right to Europe. So allowing parallel production will inhibit this transfer, this trade. Also, I want to say too that the Canadian standards is currently considered the gold standard for organic production and should continue to be that way, and we shouldn't do anything to jeopardize that. I also want to say too, not allowing parallel production speaks to the principles behind the organic farming standard. So soil health and biodiversity in particular, by encouraging farmers to grow different crop types in different rotations in different ways to not only feed the health of their soils, but also increase the biological diversity on their farm. Another point is not allowing parallel production has the potential to save the significant time and money for the producer. So this will come out in less worry about maintaining the integrity of the organic product. So this means less cleanouts, less extra paperwork, and less downtime during the busy seasons. I know for us on our farm, if we were to switch between a conventional and organic product, it would take almost a full day to clean out all of the extra equipment, the combines, the augers, everything like that, the semis to fully switch properly. And this would be a significant amount of time during the busy season. It also would increase inspection time and cost to trace both conventional and organic product in everybody's farm. I know for us, our inspection typically takes an entire day. We were to add another level of complexity to that inspection, it would take even longer. We also want to consider the decreased potential of contamination of the organic supply. So what I mean by this is that we decrease the likelihood of inadvertent mix-ups and paperwork cleanouts, etc. So even with the best intentions, mistakes do happen. And not allowing parallel production eliminates this chance of accidentally mixing organic and conventional products. Another important point along this line is that there's no chance of accidentally applying a prohibited substance to an organic field. This would make it take it out of certification for 36 months, and that's a significant loss to the producer. Also, I think not allowing parallel production actually is a good thing, as it encourages learning new farming methods more relevant and more applicable to organic production. As you're shifting from conventional to organic, we all know that's a significant mindset shift, it's a significant practice shift. So this would encourage farmers to increase their rotations, maybe start incorporating green manure, soil building years, and this also increases in the ability to tap into many different markets, which increases profitability. So with my remaining time, I want to get into some of the responses I have of reasons why people put forth that parallel production should be allowed. One reason I hear a lot is that it will prevent growers from hiding their conventional production in a second company. Allowing parallel production in the standards won't actually prevent this from happening, as certifiers will not automatically be allowed access to the books of a related company. So if somebody wants to commit fraud, if somebody wants to hide their conventional production in another company, they can continue to do so even if parallel production is allowed. Another thing I heard, and I heard it earlier in the presentation too, is that it is currently allowed in the US. And yes, there is a great market trade between Canada and the US, but I also want us to consider that the US is not in a great place right now. They have documented loss of consumer trust in their agricultural system. In fact, if you could Google organic fraud on Google, as I did last night, the whole first page is about issues in the US currently. We have increased our market share $3.5 million since 2012, and we've done this without losing the trust of the consumer. Processes are allowed. Why aren't annual crop producers? This is another common thing that I hear. As a producer as well, as a processor and a producer, we own a seed cleaning plant in our operation here. I can tell you that processors have exact amounts of product coming in and out. We have receipts, we have invoices, everything's weighed. It's very, very easy to track product coming in and out of the seed cleaning plant. Producers, unfortunately, don't have this information. Through no fault of their own, yield estimates at inspection time are far from accurate. You could have a great looking crop in the spring, but by the fall, it's absolutely dismal. And the opposite is also true. So this kind of variability is hard to account for when you're trying to track parallel production of conventional organic products. My last 2 points here that I hear a lot is it inhibits new growers from transitioning to organic, and Mike spoke to this point really well. But I also want to point out that the numbers of growers transitioning to organic are actually on the rise all across provinces. And this information is available through CODA as well. Many resources are available to also aid transitioning farmers. So these resources are varied depending on the farmer's needs. All of the great provincial groups provide transitioning resources. There's also Pivot and Grow, which is a federal transition resource. And there's seminars, there's webinars like what we're doing right now, conferences, field days, other events happening all the time. I think this maybe used to be an issue, but right now, with all the increased outreach and education, it's not so much an issue. I also want to point out too that COG recently released their agri-risk report for transitioning producers earlier this year. It's worthy to note that parallel production was not in the top 5 of identified risks faced by transitioning producers. So if we're really concerned about transitioning producers and increasing the number of organic producers in Canada, I think we should focus on those top 5 risks first before we even worry about any of the other risks. But finally, the last thing I hear the most often is it's too difficult to grow a visually distinguishable crop in transition years. And this may be true in different areas. Speaking again from a prairie perspective, we have many options available. The key though is mentorship. We do a lot of mentorship with transitioning producers to help them kind of plan ahead. Transitioning doesn't just happen. It's a planning process. You have to say, okay, in 3 years from now, I want to be able to grow a fully certified organic crop. These are the steps I'm taking every year to do so. We encourage a lot of transitioning producers to use the transition years again to build your soil. Maybe you want to plant a perennial in there or some sort of green manure crop. And then by the time you get to your last year with your fully certified organic, you have a great soil, you're able to produce a bumper crop, and then you're better off that way. So I'm not sure how much time I have, but I just want to throw up this last slide of resources if anybody's looking to get more information. The OFC I forgot to put on there is also a great resource. And I'm open to emails, questions, things like that. If you're looking to get more information from me, my email's on the bottom there as well.
Okay, thank you.